Hello, everybody. As Ashley so kindly stated, my name is Tatiana. I'm one of the dietitians here at Pro Healthcare. I do specialize in diabetes education, but today we get to talk about plant-based eating. And I think sometimes there's some confusion around what, in fact, that all encompasses. And so I wanted to draw out the differences between some of the most common plant-based eating patterns. So we've got vegetarian, vegan, and then whole food plant-based, which is really what we're going to dig into today. And so what are those differences between these different eating patterns? Well, vegetarian is going to not include any red meat, poultry, kind of those specific meat animal products, but there are some vegetarian folks that may include dairy or eggs. For a lack of a better phrase, they just don't eat flesh, but they will eat, milk or cheese. These generally will include some type of refined grain, added sugar, and oils, because there are going to be vegetarian products that are produced that might go through some more heavily processing procedures versus our whole food plant-based, which we'll see more today. Vegan is going to be more restrictive in that it doesn't include any animal products, so you're not going to have any dairy meat or dairy milk. You're not going to have any cheese. These folks aren't going to consume any egg products, right? Because these are all animal-based edibles. So only plants. However, a vegan lifestyle will generally include some type of refined grains, so something like white flour, right? Because that doesn't include any animal products, but it still is refined. Added sugars and oils. So for example, Oreos are considered vegan, right? So that would fall under all of those. When we look at a whole food plant-based diet, it includes absolutely no animal products. It's all plants, but it really focuses on minimal processing of those ingredients. So we're going to talk about whole plants, not plant fragments, right? So we can take a wheat kernel and we can break it up into its smaller pieces and use the endosperm for something, use the husk for something else, but we're breaking it up and we're not consuming it in its whole package with all of those nutrients together. So a whole food plant-based diet can be considered vegan, but a vegan lifestyle or a vegan eating plan isn't always a whole food plant-based, because again, Oreos are not going to be considered whole food plant-based, but they are considered a vegan food. So some popular documentaries, please know that not all of these are 100% whole food plant-based. They might shade more on the vegan side of things, but they can be great resources. And you can find these on different streaming services, right? Your Netflix and your Amazons. And so a lot of people can get interesting ideas, learn more about what we're going to talk about today, but sometimes folks like to be entertained, right, and watch these high quality documentaries. So I wanted to include a list of some of these references for you. What are the benefits of following a whole food plant-based lifestyle? Well, research does show that there is a strong possibility for weight loss. And when we think about eating whole food plants, we're eating a lot of vegetables, we're eating a lot of fruits, we're eating a lot of whole grains, legumes, right? We're eating these things that can have a very high water content, right? So they can fill up our stomach and they can make us feel fuller because they have a higher water content versus something that's very nutrient dense. It's going to have far less water. Well, we're going to need to eat maybe more volume and therefore potentially more calories in that same volume. Another thing that we see with weight loss is that whole food plant-based diet is very filling. It's very high in fiber, and so we can stay fuller longer, and the desire or the need to be snacking or eating as large of portions can go down for a lot of folks because that fiber content really goes through the roof. We do see an improvement in blood sugars because, again, we're taking out those refined flours, we're taking those added sugars, we're eating more of these whole food, high fiber foods. We also see a relationship, research shows that, and this is one of the big reasons why whole food plant-based can work for folks with diabetes, is that when we reduce the amount of fat that's stored within our muscle cells and our cells to begin with, we see an increase in insulin sensitivity. And so with type 2 diabetes specifically, we know that there's insulin resistance in the body. Well, whole food plant-based diet over time can really help to shift that and reduce that insulin resistance. So where that person's pancreas is still producing insulin, their body is now more receptive to using it better. And so it helps to improve those blood sugars. We see improvements in cholesterol, one, because of the higher fiber content, and two, because we are not adding or consuming added oils. We're not doing those processed foods, those saturated fats that come from animal products. We can see an improvement in those cholesterol values. We see a reduction in high blood pressure because, as we know, 70% of the sodium that we consume in our diet comes from processed and packaged foods. So a whole food plant-based eating pattern really requires us to get back in the kitchen. We're doing a lot more cooking, or we're eating a lot more, raw or minimally processed foods that won't have that added sodium or salt content. The improvement in digestion we see with the higher fiber content, and with a whole food plant-based diet, we can see some improvement in our gut bacteria because they feed on fiber. And so when we are eating these basically nutrients for the healthy bacteria that live in your gut, they're far more likely to survive than if we kind of starve them out because we're not giving them the fiber content that they need. Now, I will put a little, verbal asterisk on that improved digestion. If you are a person that wants to transition to this eating pattern, you might find that doing it slow and steady is going to be more comfortable physically, because a big increase or a big jump in fiber intake can cause a little bit of disruption in our GI system as it's getting to learn how to process that much fiber, right? We all know what I'm talking about. So adding little bit, and really transitioning to this eating pattern can make that GI process a little more comfortable. We can see an increase in energy levels. One, because we're eating foods that are giving us steady stream of energy, right? We're not on the roller coaster ride of like, I'm getting a big old sugar spike, or I'm getting this big dump of very fast energy versus another meal I'm not. We see a lot more balance in the plate and the nutrition that we're consuming. We also see an improvement in energy levels because a lot of folks find that this type of eating pattern helps to stabilize their blood sugars. Again, we're not getting those big old blood sugar spikes and then drops that can have a real big impact on energy. Improved mood and productivity. We know that there is a strong relationship between nutrition and the things we eat, and hormone regulation, cognitive function, brain processing, emotion regulation. And so when we're giving our body these highest quality, minimally processed foods, we're really nourishing those processes that need those nutrients. And then with all of these reasons, we see the potential for a reduced risk of chronic disease, whether that be developing type 2 diabetes, reduction in risk for heart disease, cancers. Whole food plant-based diet is very high in antioxidants because we're eating so many fruits and vegetables that are giving us those great antioxidants and protecting our cells. So all around, a whole food plant-based eating pattern has a lot of benefits. And in theory, it's simple, right? We're just focusing on whole, unrefined plant-based foods. So these are whole vegetables, okay? Fruits, legumes or pulses or beans, right? Your black beans, chickpeas, lima beans, garbanzo beans, whatever. Nuts and seeds, whole grains. So you have to eat the grain in its whole form, right? When we're talking about whole food plant-based, you really need to consume the entire food, the entire plant together, because that's where we see the greatest benefits. Spices, of course, count. Water, plant-based milks, and a traditional whole food plant-based, you're really going to make these at home because you have 100% control over the fact that you could just use almonds and water, right? We don't need to have any of the extras. There are a good bit of our plant-based non-dairy milks out there that are not necessarily going to fit the bill based on the ingredients that are included, whether that's to give them flavor, right? There might be some vanilla or chocolate. These are now added sugars, which would not be permitted on this eating plan. They might be using certain oils to help with the texture and the mouthfeel. So I believe that when Ashley had sent out this reminder, she included the PowerPoint, but also a grocery list. At least a sample grocery list. And if she sends this out again afterwards, you'll get access to that. So there are going to be some store-bought plant-based milks that you can get that would fit the bill. Otherwise, your best bet, make them at home. And then teas and coffee, right? If we're using whole tea leaves and steeping that, coffee beans and we're grinding, right? These are whole food plant foods. So we can consume these on this plan. What does that look like in terms of a plate, right? We might be really familiar with the My Plate in your traditional eating pattern. Well, whole food plant-based is not going to have that kind of meat protein section. It's going to include an extra beans and legumes, separate from our nuts and seeds and avocados. And really that blue sliver is going to be your primary dietary fat source. And whenever we consume dietary fat in this plan, we consume it in whole food forms. So you are not going to see olive oil included in this plan because the olive oil is only the oil from the olive, but you can consume the olive because that is the whole food. So again, this goes to whole versus fragments. And anytime that we want to follow this plan, we're consuming those foods in their most whole form. We see that there is a very big emphasis on vegetables, especially our leafy green vegetables. We've got some fruits, and then our whole grains or our starchy vegetables, things like your potatoes or sweet potatoes, corn, peas, right? These are higher starch foods, still considered a vegetable botanically, but we're going to put them in the same category as things like quinoa or wild rice. And so what could this look like in actual foods? Well, I have snipped two examples here. Top one, we see that we've got black beans. This would be our primary protein source of this meal. We're using corn tortilla, so 100% corn tortilla, right? We can change the shape of the corn, but we're still using the entire corn kernel and consuming the entire corn kernel. We've got half of a plate of a variety of roasted vegetables, peppers, zucchini, onions. We got a little side salad over there. We've got some nuts. We've got a banana, right? We've got all of those different plant-based food groups, but they're consumed in their whole forms. The one on the bottom, we're looking at a different type of bean or legume pulse. These are black-eyed peas. Our starch in this example is yams. We've got that half a plate of those green leafy veggies. And then again, some additional colored vegetables so that we're the rainbow of color, right? A little serving of fruit and then a serving of nuts. And so you could see that eating these meals, they're pretty robust, right? Like, I don't know about you, but I would feel pretty full if I consumed all of that because each one of these plates is easily 15 to 20 grams of fiber, and that's just one meal. To put that into perspective, standard American diet and the standard American individual consumes only about 15 grams of dietary fiber every day. The minimum for most folks is 25 to 30, and this type of eating pattern, whole food plant-based, you're easily consuming a minimum of 40 grams of fiber every single day. And we have to remember that the things that provide us the greatest and longest satiety, or that fullness, right, what keeps us full, are proteins, fibers, and some healthy fats. Well, this eating pattern really promotes all of those type of nutrients, fiber especially. And so as your body's busy breaking all that fiber down, guess what it's not doing? Getting hungry because it's busy doing something else. We get hungry when our body is done with that previous process, which is why when we consume things like refined grains, right, a slice of white toast or a bowl of processed cereal, the human body is amazingly efficient at digesting that, getting it out of the stomach, getting it out of the GI system, and boom, we've converted it to blood sugars, and now our GI system's empty again. Well, that's when we start to feel hungry again, which is why you eat a bowl of cereal at 8 o'clock and you're hungry by 8:36 because the body's so fast. But if we can shift to more whole foods, more fiber, more of those good high fiber protein sources, your body is going to be busy for 60, 90, 120, 3 hours worth of time breaking all this down. And in that time, you're not eating again because you're not getting hungry. And it's one of the best ways in how this plan can really support weight loss. So what are the recommendations? The beauty of a whole food plant-based eating pattern is that it doesn't require calorie counting, okay? It really just encourages the right mix and match of these different whole food groups that you can see listed there. Now, I will preface this with for folks that are not on any type of insulin dosing based on carbs, there's no carb counting either. So as long as we're getting balanced meals like you saw on that previous slide, right? We've got our protein, we've got our vegetable, we've got our portion of fruits, we have our single ounce of nuts, right? Counting up those carb grams isn't as important because you're getting the right types of foods in the right balance. Now, for those folks with diabetes that are doing insulin dosages based on the carbs you consume. So for example, if you're on Novolog or Humalog and you have to check your blood sugar before a meal and you're supposed to be eating, let's say 60 grams of carbs a meal to match your insulin dose, well, then it is going to be important that you continue to do that carb counting. But generally speaking, for a person that's not on those medications and doesn't need to do that, following these portions in balanced meal structure across the day, calorie counting and carb counting is not as necessary. And then when we talk about the range, right, like 2 to 4 servings, well, the 2 servings of fruit is going to be for somebody that would be in a, let's say, a smaller body, somebody that's not going to be as active, somebody that's not going to be as tall, right, doesn't require as much, versus a 35-year-old man who's 6'2" and goes to the gym 5 times a week. Well, then of course we can sit on the higher range of that. And we also take into the account hunger fullness. So if you find that you are fully satisfied with the bottom half of those ranges, well, you don't need to go up more because your body is getting what it needs through those hunger fullness cues. But again, you're going to see fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, veggies, nuts, seeds, fortified plant milk, or just making your own plant milk at home. And then you can use as many herbs and spices as you want to really give your food a lot of flavor and make it tasty. So when we say choose these sparingly, the top 5 especially, nuts and seeds, avocados, coconut, dried fruits, and then your natural sweeteners such as honey, this is really going to be from a weight loss perspective, knowing that those foods are going to inherently provide you more calories than something like a serving of fruits or for vegetables, or if you're doing your leafy greens, or you're doing, your beans for your protein sources. The nuts and seeds, avocados, and coconut are the primary fat sources on this eating plan. And as with any balanced eating plan, we want to make sure that we're not overdoing it, which is why we, on the previous slide, we're talking about 1 to 2 servings of nuts and seeds. Avocados in their whole form, coconut in its whole form, dried fruits and sweeteners. I really encourage you to try and consume fresh or frozen fruits versus the dried. And this again goes back to that water content. Research supports that fullness comes from the weight of the food that we consume. So when we can consume foods that have inherently higher water content, water has weight. So it's going to contribute to your feelings of fullness. When we consume dried fruits, we vacuum sucked or whatever, all of the water content out of that and concentrated the nutrition into a smaller portion. And so not only do we get more bang for our buck from the fullness factor by eating those fresh or frozen fruits, but then we also get the satisfaction of visually looking at the plate and saying, oh, well, that 1 cup of strawberries looks a lot more satisfying than those 4, 5, 6 dried strawberries that take up significantly less space. Caffeine and alcohol, these are, we get caffeine from our teas and our coffees, but as with anything, we want to make sure that we're not overdoing it on caffeine and alcohol. We want to make sure that we're staying hydrated, drinking our waters, or doing decaf coffee or decaf teas sprinkled in. And then the reason why this eating plan encourages sparingness of soy protein, tofu, and seitan is just the level of processing that those foods go through versus consuming a black bean, right? Versus tofu that's gone through additional processing. Now, generally speaking, for what we consider minimally processed foods in this eating plan would be things like guacamole. right? We've taken an avocado and we've added some jalapenos and cilantro and whatnot. We're not adding any additional oil, but it's been minimally processed, right? We've just kind of converted its shape. Hummus is another example, right? You're going to throw something like your chickpeas, your garlic, any type of red bell peppers, whatever else you want to put in there to season it up. You're going to put that in a blender or a food processor. So you've just changed the shape, but you're still eating that whole food. Applesauce, right? You're cooking down apples, but you're eating the whole apple. Salsas, natural peanut butters. These are things that have been processed, but you're still taking that whole food and just, again, changing its shape. And those are permitted on this eating pattern. Condiments are also considered okay to consume. We think about something like mustard, right? Mustard seeds, hot sauce, vinegars. These are also permitted on this eating plan. Yes, they've been processed or changed a little bit, but they're still consuming the whole food in its fullness. We're just changing its shape or it looks a little different. And then which foods are excluded are obviously going to be all your animal products. So any type of meat, fish, seafood, poultry, dairy, eggs, cheeses, right? These are all animal foods. Added fats. So this goes back to that plant fragment, right? So like coconut oil is just one part of the coconut. Liquid oils, like that olive oil I mentioned. The oil of the olive is just a fragment of the olive. We really want to be consuming the olive in its whole form. And then obviously butter is an animal product, and margarine is going to have a whole host of food-like ingredients that would not be considered whole food plant-based. Any of your refined or processed grains, again, that goes back to a plant fragment. When we are consuming white flour, all we've done is remove that white innard from our whole wheat or whole grain, and we've done something else with the other parts of it, but we really want to be eating all of them together. Vegan replacement foods. Perfect example is going to be something like a frozen veggie burger. This is going to be a more highly processed food product, and it is going to be including plant fragments versus whole food elements. Now, if you wanted to make your own black bean burger at home, then you were going to use whole black beans, whole garlic cloves, right, and make your own patties. That's one thing, but those frozen, chicken in quotes, or your frozen veggie burgers, they generally include plant fragments. Any type of added sugar food, okay, and then certain beverages. These are going to be things like obviously your sodas, fruit juices. Again, goes back to plant fragment. Apple juice is just one part of the apple. You really want to be consuming the whole apple. Sports drinks, energy drinks, and then any type of blended or sugar sweetened coffee or tea, right? We all know the most popular place to get coffee out there, and it's 20 deep drive through. Like 98% of their menu would not be included on this type of eating pattern, considering the amount of added sugars, potential for dairy products, what kind of plant-based milks would we be using. Otherwise, we want to verify, right, that they don't, again, have added sugars, which I can promise that most of them do. We really want to make sure that we are aware of our beverages and our drinks in this eating plan. What are some special nutrients to consider? Because it's really common for folks to say, well, if I'm not eating meat or I'm not drinking milk, I'm not going to be getting enough calcium, I'm not going to get enough protein. And there are certain things that we do need to be mindful of. First and foremost is vitamin B12. This is a B vitamin that we as humans consume exclusively from animal products. So if we're removing all animal products, we're not going to be getting our B12. And so this is something that you would want to supplement. Iron. We've got non-heme versus heme iron sources. What does that mean? Well, iron in the body is incredibly important and vital for our survival. We can get iron from animals, and we can also get iron from plants. Now, because the human body is an animal, we recognize the iron consumed from animal products more similarly to ourselves. And so this is our heme iron, and it's easier for the human body to absorb heme iron when we consume animals. But that's okay, because we've got non-heme iron sources from plant-based foods. So just imagine that it is a different little shape, right? And so our human body says, well, that's not as recognizable. I got to work a little harder to get the iron out of there. And so we see that it has lower bioavailability, meaning that less of it is available to the human body to put to use. So basic math, if you were to consume, 10 units of iron in non-heme, the human body might only be able to absorb 5. But if we consume that same amount from animals, we might be able to consume 8 or 10, just based on that bioavailability. But research has shown that when we consume non-heme iron or plant-based iron sources in the presence of vitamin C, we increase that bioavailability. So what does that mean? For example, you're going to make yourself a salad for lunch, and you're going to put black beans in that salad as your protein source. Well, black beans are a source of iron. If we can put some mandarin slices or some tomato into that salad, which are sources of vitamin C, now when we consume that together, the body's going to have an easier time sucking that non-heme iron out of those black beans and putting it to use in the human body. Calcium, we know that the primary calcium source in the standard American diet is going to be from dairy products. And so if we're not consuming those on this eating pattern, where are we going to get them from? There are a whole host of vegetables that can be sources of calcium, as well as your soybeans, calcium fortified tofu, which you can purchase, and then calcium fortified plant milks, which again, there are some on the market. You don't have to make them at home to follow this eating pattern. But we want to call out specific ones because, again, we're going to go to that bioavailability piece. And certain vegetables and their calcium within is not as bioavailable to the human body, such as spinach. Our body, the human body, has a harder time getting calcium out of spinach versus kale. And so when we consume our green vegetables, we really want to be incorporating the ones that we know are more bioavailable to us. Vitamin D, again, when we remove dairy products, this is one of the primary sources of vitamin D in the standard American diet because we are supplementing our milks primarily with vitamin D. So this is something that you can consider supplementing. Also, remember that vitamin D comes from sunlight. So as long as we're spending enough time outside and getting some sun rays, our body is able to synthesize vitamin C on its own. It is very common, and we see this, kind of wave up and down here in the hospital and in our clinics, is that vitamin D levels have a tendency to drop in the winter and increase in the summer. Makes perfect sense. Who in the world wants to be outside when it's sleeting and all the things it did, 2 weeks ago? No one's outside, okay, right? And we also, where's the sun? It's so far away. So we do see that in the wintertime, it's so important that we get enough vitamin D. And if we're not getting it from fortified dairy products or fortified, plant-based milks, then we need to either be getting that from supplements, and then in the summertime, or when we, like today, it's beautiful, sunny outside, spend a little time outside. Omega-3 fatty acids. A lot of people are familiar with getting their omega-3s from fatty fish like salmon. Obviously, that's not on this eating pattern, but we do have good news in that we can get omega-3s from some plant-based foods, including flaxseed and chia seeds, hemp seeds, and walnuts. They're very similar to the iron conversation. There's different types of omega-3s, basically meaning that they kind of come in different shapes, okay? And so the omega-3s that we consume from animals come in the form of DHA and EPA. And the body has a little easier time getting those into the human body and using them, versus the plant-based form of omega-3s is ALA. And the body has to work a little harder to get that converted into the most bioavailable form. So you can consider supplementing with a DHA or EPA supplement. Not necessary, because if you're incorporating enough of those flax, chia, hemp, or walnuts into your daily intake, you can easily meet your omega-3 needs. Let me make sure I didn't have any notes on that. No, okay. And then protein. This is probably the one that I get across the board the most. Well, if I'm not eating meats or I'm not eating animal products, I'm not going to get enough protein in my diet. Well, I've got either good or bad news, but the standard American diet, which we label as SAD, because that is unfortunately what it is, far exceeds the standard human body's protein needs. We can easily get enough protein by like morning snack, depending on what we're eating, okay? And so there's plenty of plant-based proteins that we can incorporate into meals and snacks to easily meet your daily protein needs. So again, this is going to go to our beans and legumes. Hummus, right? It's made from chickpeas. Peanuts, peanut butter, tree nuts, and nut butters, right? So like an almond butter, absolutely sources of protein. Seeds like our sesame seeds, chia seeds, sunflower seeds, sources of protein. Tahini is a paste that's made from ground sesame seeds. So think about sesame seed to tahini, the same as peanuts to peanut butter. You're just changing the shape of it, okay? But we include that into hummus, right? So that would be an additional protein source. Leafy greens and green vegetables to a smaller degree can provide some protein. Nutritional yeast is a great alternative to cheese, like sprinkling cheese. It is a plant-based yeast form, and when you consume it, it kind of tastes like Parmesan. And so for folks that want like popcorn, and they would normally put cheese on their popcorn, or if they're having whole wheat pasta and they would normally sprinkle cheese, nutritional yeast is a great plant-based alternative. It tastes like cheese, but then it's got the added benefit of giving you additional protein. Wild rice and quinoa. Quinoa is unique in that it's a grain that provides us, it's considered a complete protein, meaning it gives us the same amino acids or the same protein building blocks that we would get from, let's say, a chicken breast, okay? So incorporating quinoa in. And then your soy-based products, tofu, edamame, tempeh or seitan, all going to be soy-based ingredients. These are additional great protein sources. So not only can you easily get enough protein in your diet by following this eating pattern, by eating a variety of these foods, it is important that we remember the body can only digest and process so much at one time. And so you are best to evenly distribute your protein sources across your meals and snacks. Incorporate a little bit with breakfast, right? We're going to use peanut butter. Incorporate a little bit with that first snack because you're going to have a handful of walnuts. Incorporate a little bit of lunch because you're going to have beans. Incorporate a little bit at dinner because you're going to make some type of lentil dish with some quinoa. And you're going to have protein, protein, protein across your meals and snacks. That's going to better ensure your body is taking in and absorbing all of that protein versus you eat just one big protein meal and then don't have any the rest of the day. Well, our body can only digest so much at one time. It can only absorb so much at one time. And so you're increasing the risk of loss in that eating pattern versus spreading it out across the day. All right, getting into some recipe ideas. Overnight oats or chia seed pudding. So these are great things to make your life easier the following morning, especially if you're strapped for time. I have an oatmeal recipe on the next slide, but chia seed pudding, very simply, is you're going to take 2 tablespoons of chia seeds, mix them with a half cup of your preferred plant-based milk. So let's say almond milk. You're going to mix that together, stir, 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 keep it in your fridge overnight. The next morning, you're going to wake up and you're going to have this delicious like gelatinized chia seed pudding, and then you can add your fresh fruits. You can add a couple chopped walnuts. It's tasty and it makes your mornings so simple. Veggie tofu scramble, also something that I have included that we'll talk about. And then smoothies, right? You can just put all that stuff into a blender, your fresh fruits, a bunch of different vegetables, your plant-based, almond milk, for example, blend that up, you're running out the door, and you can get a ton of those food groups met all in one meal. So baked steel cut oatmeal. This is something that you can make ahead of time and then have leftovers for the week. We're going to be using steel cut oats, unsweetened almond milk, really your frozen fruits of choice, and then as much cinnamon as you want to season it up. Mix it all together, you bake it, you can add additional fresh fruit on top of it, but the oats are going to provide you some protein. The cherries and the blueberries are going to provide you that fiber and flavor. Oh, it's super tasty. And then again, you can just keep those leftovers in the fridge all week long and just start cutting out bits or scooping out bits and really eat it cold or hot, whatever your preference. And then here, instead of using eggs to make an egg scramble, tofu is a great alternative when we use that extra firm tofu. So it's going to have minimal water, so it's going to hold its shape better. And then any of your veggies of choice, and you'll see there, I want to call this out, you're going to see there that we're adding water to a saucepan, and then we're going to saute that onion and that garlic and those veggies just in the water. Now someone's like, you can't do that. You need oil, right? You need to, that's how you saute something. And in fact, you don't. Using something like a minimally processed veggie broth or water and just putting it back into your pan and mixing those vegetables up, they will soften. And you do not need the oil, which again is a plant fragment. You do not need the oil to fully saute them. And then once we've got those vegetables to, they're starting to cook, right? They get a little tender. That's when we eventually are going to add in our tofu, and you just break it up in there, and it kind of starts to look like scrambled eggs because it gets that like, I don't even know what the description is, but they look like little fluffy bits of tofu, and you mix it in, and especially when you add turmeric, which we know is yellow, now everything kind of turns yellow and it looks like scrambled eggs. So this is a great alternative if you are an egg fan in the morning. For our dinners, we could do things like a roasted cauliflower steak with a side of quinoa. If you haven't done cauliflower steaks, something I highly encourage you to try. Super simple. You just buy yourself a whole head of cauliflower. You're going to cut lengthwise, right? So we're going to get like these whole big pieces, usually about an inch thick, and you can roast them, grill them. They get a little caramelized. They're so tasty and tender. And then by including that side of quinoa, which we had mentioned is a complete protein, that's going to be your protein source for the meal. And then you can add a side salad, right? We can have a side of fruit. We can round it out like we saw in those earlier slides. Lentil sloppy joes, you can do sloppy joes really with any beans versus ground meat. Barley vegetable soup. Barley, again, can be a source of whole grain, but also a low protein source with any vegetables that you would want to add. Makes great on a Sunday and you're set for the whole week. Bean chilies. So again, we're going to have a whole host of beans. You can put in your vegetables, your tomatoes, crock pot, make it simple. Generally speaking, on a whole food plant-based eating pattern, whole grain pasta is included when we read the label and it says whole grain, whatever kind of wheat they're using, right? Whole grain brown wheat, whole grain hard wheat, single ingredient, right? We're using the whole plant and we're just changing its shape and incorporating that with a bunch of different vegetables. Curry chickpeas, which I have a recipe for next, and then portobello veggie stir fry. So this is using mushrooms, and you can use portobellos or any kind of mushroom you want, but that can really help to impart some of that meaty texture because we know portobellos and mushrooms in general, right, they taste a little different. Their texture is different than something like zucchini. And so a lot of people say that it's a nice alternative to ground meat or meat in general, just based on its mouthfeel. So that recipe for curry chickpeas, if you, very, very simple, you just need 2 pans. You're making your rice, however you want to do that. And you could do quinoa, you can do farro, you can do any type of whole grain that you want. This is just using brown basmati rice. And if you are going to be making a grain for the week, please make more than you need so that you don't have to continue to get that pot or your rice cooker, dirty every single day that you're going to be making something, but you're just reheating the cooked stuff all week long. And then otherwise, all of those ingredients just get put into one large pan, cooked together, simmered, and then you get to kind of play around with the flavors, the cilantro, the black pepper, how much ginger do you really want to put in there? And this also makes for great leftovers for days to come, something that you can make on a Sunday and you're set for the week. Oil-free dressing. So this is something else that I wanted to call out because for folks that are doing, going to be doing a bunch of salads, well, since we know that this plan does not permit oils because they're plant fragments, what is a way that we are going to dress our salad without that? Well, first and foremost, salsa makes a great salad dressing alternative, right? Because it moistens up all the leaves and it mixes really nicely, but you're using whole foods, right? You're putting in your tomato, your garlic, your onion, your jalapeno, whatever kind of salsa you want to make. So that's a really great salad dressing alternative. Otherwise, I wanted to include this nice creamy oil-based dressing that's using beans, whether you're using navy beans or cannellini beans, great northern beans, any type of white bean will work. All that you would just kind of cook together, and you're going to put it in a food processor or a blender, and that'll keep all week long, that you can just keep adding to your salads throughout the week. The other thing I did have on here is in terms of oil alternatives in baking. So remember, this plan doesn't include oils. So if we're going to be doing any type of baked good with something like almond meal, right? We're going to be using these whole food ingredients. What are those alternatives to oil? Well, first and foremost, we can use applesauce, silken tofu, okay, so not that extra firm, but silken tofu, which is much softer, or pumpkin puree. And the ratio, a half cup of oil to a third cup of any of those. So if your recipe calls for half a cup of canola oil, you can use a third cup of that pumpkin puree as an even swap. Otherwise, two other considerations are going to be whole nut butter. So remember the peanut butter, almond butter, cashew butter that doesn't have any of the, when I say peanut butter, I mean like real peanut butter. When you read the ingredients, it says peanuts, period, right? It doesn't have 16 different ingredients. The oil should separate out and we mix it all back together. So you can use whole nut butter for 1-to-1. So if a recipe calls for 2 tablespoons of oil, you can do 2 tablespoons of nut butter. Or, interesting, is aquafaba. Well, what's that? Well, that's the liquid that we get from chickpeas. So if you buy like canned chickpeas and it comes in that kind of gelatinous liquid, we call that aquafaba. And that can also be a 1-to-1. So if your recipe calls for half a cup of oil, you can use a half a cup of that chickpea fluid in place of it. And do know that it is pretty neutral tasting, right? Folks are like, I don't know, it's going to taste weird. No, you don't notice a taste at all. So those are some other oil alternatives. Now, eating out. A lot of people say, oh my gosh, I'm never going to be able to eat out of the house again if I'm following an eating pattern like this. And that's not necessarily true. Yes, it might require a little more diligence, asking a few more questions, maybe doing some homework, but you absolutely can go out with your family and friends and celebrate and do all the things while following this eating pattern. So first, we want to make sure that we've got a plan, right? Prepare as much as you can ahead of time. Can you look at the menu online or on an app, on their website? Can you call, right? And kind of get some information before you're even there. If you can review the menu, I encourage folks to create your own mini menu. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, some of the places that we go to, we open them up and it's like the menu takes up the whole table because there's 80 different options to choose from. Well, when we're trying to figure out a change in our eating pattern and we get into a situation like that, it can sometimes feel overwhelming. It's loud, the lights are different, maybe you're with friends and family and they're trying to talk to you and it's hard to concentrate. So doing a little bit of this homework where you create your own mini menu, whether you put notes on your phone or you write it on a little Post-it note, so that when you go and sit down at the table, you don't even need to open up the restaurant menu that they hand you, because you're just going to pull out your little notepad and you're going to have your 5 or 6 different things that you know are going to fit the bill. Obviously, we want to look for things that are chock full of those vegetables, and then be mindful of cooking processes. Steamed, baked, and grilled are going to reduce any type of added fats generally. We obviously want to not order things like crispy, fried, rich, creamy. These are all going to generally include some type of added oil, which we don't want. So ask for what you want. If you see different ingredients in 2 different menu items, ask, hey, I see that I can get beans here. I see I can get that there. Is there any way that I can get, those things put together? Because they're both back in the kitchen. And so what's the worst thing they can do is say, no substitutions allowed. Okay, at least you've asked. But if you know that the ingredients are on site and you just ask if they can mix and match a little differently, they might very well be prepared to do so. Be mindful that cheeses and sauces are generally going to have those added fats, potentially added sugars. We want to ask for those on the side or not at all. You want to ask for things to be prepared without butter or oil, so specify how it's being cooked. We want to be choosing our whole grains, whole grain bread, whole grain grains versus your white breads or your white rices, and brown rice instead of white, or even better if they have wild rice or black rice. Those are going to have even higher fiber contents than brown rice. So I just wanted to give some reference points for different restaurant establishments and kind of things to look out for on their menus. When we go out for Chinese or Asian, they generally offer steamed options, a bunch of steamed vegetable choices. So that makes life really easy. Be mindful that their sauces are going to have a bunch of added oils and potentially added sugars. So we're going to want to ask for those on the side or not at all, knowing that the steamed products should not have those sauces, or verify, right? Ask. And then again, asking for brown instead of white rice. Going out to Indian, generally have a lot of vegetarian choices. So we got a solid start, but we want to make sure that we are asking about how things are being prepared, if they're being made with oils, butters, or ghee, which is clarified butter, and it is traditionally used in Indian cooking. And so that is something that we would not want to be included in the dish that we're consuming. Tomato-based curries are generally pretty safe. You're going to see a lot of beans and legumes on those menus, so it really allows for a lot of choices generally. Italian, a lot of folks say, oh, I can never eat Italian food again, right? Because it's going to be cheeses and it's white pastas. Well, we can ask, right? What kind of crusts are they using? Are they using whole semolina flour? What kind of flours are in their products? If they're making fresh pasta, right, you can clarify what kind of flour are you using. But you are going to see a lot of vegetable choices. And you're going to want to make sure that you're mindful about, again, oil and butter. We know that a lot of their products are going to have olive oil included or potentially be cooked in butter. So you're going to want to ask for those without. And it can be helpful to bring your own dressing if you intend to be getting some type of salad or something where you would want to have some type of sauce. So I had provided that oil-free dressing a couple slides ago, which you see there's a second one here. We've got balsamic vinegar or lemon juice, a little mustard, honey or maple syrup. Again, these are going to be whole food products. Mix them together in a 3-2-1. So 3 parts lemon juice, 2 parts mustard, 1 part honey. And you can put that into a small container and pull it out of your purse or your pocket or whatever. And it can kind of open up some options on a menu. If you're like, well, that salad sounds good, but I don't want to eat it dry. Always consider bringing your own. Or if they offer oil and vinegar on the table, right, and it is a balsamic vinegar, you can just use that on its own, skipping the oil. And they make a ton of different flavored vinegars too, to make life even more interesting. You can make your own, right? You can flavor your garlic flavored, blah, 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 whatever. But looking out for flavored balsamic vinegar. And somebody asked, is honey plant-based? Technically speaking, yes, it is. They allow it on this eating pattern because it is not an animal-based, like it didn't, yes, honey or bees made it, but it came out of a honeycomb, it came out of a plant. And so like you can eat honeycomb because it's not an animal food, right? Even though bees deal with it, it's not flesh, it's not milk, it's not eggs. It didn't like, and that's a great question. But yes, that is one thing on here that's like, but yes, on a whole food plant-based diet, honey in moderation is permitted. When we go out for Mexican, as long as we're willing to be flexible, generally have lots of beans. You can order fresh corn tortillas, right, that are just the corn. The flour tortillas we're going to want to stay away from because they're going to use white flour, which would be a plant fragment. We've got tons of salsa options that are going to be those whole food plant-based salad fixings, whether that be your lettuce and your tomatoes and your jalapenos and your corn. These are all plant-based foods. Vegetarian chili, bean-based soups, vegetable-based soups. You do want to ask, though, when we go out to Mexican, how their beans are prepared, especially their refried beans, because a lot of refried beans can be made with butter and oil, right? So we're going to want to be getting just their plain pinto beans, their plain black beans. So again, asking how things are being prepared. And then if we're going out to a cafe for sandwiches, things like that, if we can get whole wheat bread and then just throw on as many veggies as you want. Remember that those condiments are permitted on this eating plan. And then salads, as long as, again, you're bringing your own dressing, or if we've got availability to just add some fresh lemon juice, a little balsamic vinegar, if you have access to salsa, those type of things. And then if we go to a steakhouse, someone's like, I could never go to a steakhouse again because all it is meat. Not necessarily, right? You could look at a really well-balanced meal of saying, hey, I can get a side of baked potato. So let me make my own loaded baked potato with beans, corns, fresh salsa. And now I've got my protein, my starch, my vegetables, and it's all these different colors. And please make sure, I forgot to mention this earlier, when you eat your potato, because again, whole food, you got to eat the skin because the skin's where a lot of good nutrition and especially the fiber is. Fresh salads, if they've got a salad bar selection, look at their sides. So sometimes when we go to places, their already pre-made entrees can feel a little complicated or you have to ask for too many changes. But if you go to the side list of like, okay, well, here are the 8 sides that you could add to a sandwich, you very likely will be able to make a meal from the steamed broccoli, the grilled asparagus, the side of baked potato, corn on the cob, side of fresh fruit, right? And you can make this meal from just those side dishes. There's also the concern that like, well, this is going to be really expensive. And not necessarily, because I want to remind you that for most people, one of the most expensive parts of their food budget are their animal meats, when they go to the meat section, you go to the deli section and you're getting turkey, ham, steak, chicken, milks, eggs. We all know eggs, right? And so when we can take all of those food dollars that we were spending on those generally more expensive animal products and repurpose them to the produce department and then strategic center aisle items like oatmeal, dried beans, a bag of potatoes, a bag of onions, your grains, your brown rices, and you can purchase these potentially in larger quantities and then freeze them or store appropriately. Some research has done some math and shown that when folks follow a whole food plant-based diet, they can save up to $750 a person per year compared to following the standard American diet. So it is doable and it absolutely can help us to save money if we're being strategic about it. Shopping seasonally for our produce can help to reduce some of the travel cost premiums, right? We know that blueberries in the winter have to travel thousands of miles to get up here to cold Wisconsin versus in the middle of summer, well, we might have some stuff closer to us, and so they don't have to travel as far, which means you're paying for less labor, less gas. All those pieces go into what you pay at the register. Nuts and seeds can be on the pricier side, so it is good that the budget and the recommendations for portions match up, right? We don't have unlimited nuts and seeds that we're consuming on a daily basis following this plan. So being strategic about when we're buying our nuts and seeds, right? Are they on sale? When do we intend to use them? And then proper storage. I strongly encourage you to store your nuts and seeds in your refrigerator or your freezer. The very sensitive fats and oils naturally found within the nuts and seeds can go rancid or go bad faster, especially when exposed to light or heat. And so by storing them in your fridge and freezer, you can really extend their life and make sure that we're not having any food waste. And then another great way to save some money is to consider farmers markets or CSAs. So in the winter time, I know Milwaukee has a winter farmers market, but I know that there's tons of options around here in Waukesha in the summer and the fall times. And so these are areas where we can also maybe shave off a couple dollars versus paying more of a premium at a big box store. And then what are some specific plant-based foods that we can find kind of bang for their buck, right? Whether that be nutritionally or from a dollar perspective. Well, quality and value for fruits, apples, pears, oranges, bananas. These are generally very affordable. Apples, pears, and oranges can last a nice bit of time in our refrigerator. And when you purchase your bananas, because we all know bananas are super affordable, please try to buy them kind of on like a time frame, right? So you buy 2 greens, 2 that like, hey, they're going to be ready in 2 days, and then 2 that, hey, I'm ready to eat in these 2 days. And that can really help to minimize food waste. Berries are amazing nutritional powerhouses, awesome source of antioxidants. Consider frozen, or if you can get a good deal on fresh, freeze them yourself, and then you'll have them, all year round. Greens, especially when you purchase whole heads versus the ones that have already kind of been chopped or cleaned for you, you are going to pay a premium for that convenience. But when we can purchase whole heads, we can really get a lot of food for pretty affordable prices. Cruciferous vegetables, we call these our cancer fighters. So your broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, cabbage, they have a particular sulfur containing compound within them that we show can really help protect our cells. So we want to incorporate those on a daily, weekly basis. Potatoes and sweet potatoes, especially when we purchase them in larger quantities. Onions can purchase in larger quantities and store correctly. They will last for weeks and months. And then for your herbs and spices, right, because we're not going to be using a lot of processed sauces and things like that. We want to flavor our food in the most whole food way. Those natural herbs and spices are going to be a great way to do that. Growing them at home, if you have access to a little garden, can definitely be more affordable than having to buy new ones every week you're going in, versus they just keep growing and you cut, they grow and you cut, and save a lot, $2, $3, $4, $5 every week that you can then put on more vegetables. Some additional online resources I wanted to give you access to, the powerplate.org, Forks Over Knives, which is a very popular documentary I had called out at the beginning of this presentation. Tons of recipes, meal plans, more information about the nutritional value of this eating pattern. Kaiser Permanente offers a free online booklet. It's pretty extensive, also very nice. All you got to do is just Google that. And then the Plant-Based Nutrition Quick Start Guide, another resource for meal plans, recipes, grocery lists, kind of putting all of this information together. I just wanted to end on this awesome quote from Michael Pollan, if anybody's familiar. He says that if it comes from a plant, eat it. If it was made in a plant, don't. And this is getting back to, we want to be eating food, not food-like product. And some people would say that our grocery store is over 80% food-like product at this point. It might look like food, it might taste like food, but when we consume it, our body's having a really hard time recognizing it as food because it has been so manipulated and adulterated from its natural origin, right? That whole food, all of the nutrients, and consuming them in the package in which they were meant to be consumed. So even if we can't go whole hog on this, right? I'm not asking you to go into your kitchen and throw away all your animal-based products, but if there were at least some ideas that we can help to shift and move more towards more whole food, less processed, more plants, that might start with saying, one day a week, us as a family, we're going to do whole food plant-based eating, and we're going to try some new recipes, and we're going to try some new ingredients, we're going to try some new vegetables, and then the next day, if we want to get back to our normal pattern, okay. Your body's going to thank you for that day that you did feed it this stuff that it really needs and wants. You might also break it down by saying, okay, I can't commit to a whole day because I live in Wisconsin and I can't imagine a day without cheese. Okay, that's fine, I hear you. Maybe I'm going to start with breakfast. Over this next week, I'm going to experiment with some whole food, plant-based breakfast options that don't include any of those animals or any of those processed grains. And I'm going to see if I can't come up with some things that I find really satisfying. Maybe you decide to start with snacks. Whatever it might be, just know that any little bit that you can do to incorporate some minimally processed plant-based foods, your body really is going to benefit.